Maps are not just drawings, they're memory, and some memories were meant to be erased. A fragile piece of parchment curls in the heat. A map burns slowly, edges darkening, lines melting into smoke. But look closer. It's not just a map. It's a record of something we were never meant to see, because the parts being consumed by fire are lands you've never read about in any textbook. Now ask yourself, how did a 16th century map show the coastline of Antarctica centuries before it was officially discovered? And more importantly, how did it show that coastline without ice? Welcome to the world of forbidden cartography, where ancient maps reveal civilizations, continents, and routes that history refuses to acknowledge. These aren't fantasy. They're real maps, preserved in museums, drawn with precision, and sourced from documents even older. Documents that may have come from Atlantis, from Lemuria, or from an era lost in the floodwaters of time. What if ancient explorers weren't discovering new worlds, but retracing the ghost lines of forgotten ones? In this video, we'll follow the trail of ancient maps to unlock a hidden history. One drawn not just in ink, but in geometry, myth, and silence. Because sometimes what's left off the map is where the real story begins. Part 1. The Piri Reis Map and the Mystery of Antarctica. In 1929, as Turkish historians were cataloguing forgotten treasures inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, they found a fragment of an old world map, faded, fragile, and drawn on the skin of gazelle. It would change everything. The map was signed by Piri Reis, a famed Ottoman admiral and cartographer, and dated to 1513, just a few decades after Columbus. But what stunned scholars wasn't what it showed. It was how much it showed. The Piri Reis map accurately depicted the coastline of South America, the west coast of Africa, and, most controversially, a detailed outline of Antarctica. But there's a catch. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years later. And even then, its coastline was buried under miles of ice. Yet Piri Reis's map shows the continent's actual landmass, not with ice, but with clear geographic accuracy, mountain ranges, river basins, and inlets that only modern satellite scans would later confirm. So how was this possible? Piri Reis himself wrote in the margins that his map was compiled from ancient source maps no longer available, many believed to be Greek, Phoenician, or even Egyptian in origin. Some researchers suggest those sources came from the legendary Library of Alexandria before it was destroyed, along with untold knowledge of the ancient world. Yet what lies beneath this discovery is far stranger than we imagined. In 1960, a team led by Professor Charles Hapgood presented a shocking analysis. The landmass of Antarctica on the Piri Reis map showed no ice cover, a condition that, according to geological studies and ice core samples, hasn't existed for at least 6,000 years. In other words, the original maps Piri Reis used must have been based on a time when humans, or someone, could sail freely along the Antarctic coast. But who had that knowledge? Who had the vantage point, or the memory to map Antarctica before it froze? And more importantly, why was that knowledge forgotten? The precision of the map suggests an advanced understanding of navigation, cartography, and global geography, far beyond what was known in the 16th century, or even during classical antiquity. And if Antarctica was mapped in its ice-free state, that means someone was sailing those waters thousands of years before our current civilization began. This forces us to consider a radical possibility that there existed in the distant past a seafaring culture highly advanced, deeply knowledgeable, and now completely erased. Could this have been Atlantis, or a remnant of Lemuria, or some other forgotten world whose maps survived only as fragments in the hands of those who remembered? In the next part, we'll explore more of these maps, ones that show not just hidden coastlines, but entire continents now submerged, and routes that point to a time when the world was far more connected than we've been taught. Because the Piri Reis Map may be just the beginning, a surviving page from a much older atlas. Part 2. Lost Continents, Submerged Lands, and Pre-Flood Cartography. If the Piri Reis Map is the tip of the iceberg, then what lies beneath it are entire lost continents. Because the Piri Reis Map is not the only ancient chart that defies history. Take the Orontius Map, drawn in 1531. It too depicts Antarctica, but this time with full mountain ranges, rivers and valleys, mapped out with shocking precision, centuries before seismic radar or ice-penetrating satellites. Then there's Gerardus Mercator, the famed cartographer behind the world's most enduring projection. Few know that in his private works, Mercator recorded knowledge of lands beyond the Arctic and spoke of a central vortex at the North Pole, surrounded by 4 great rivers and 4 continents. Legend or memory? And perhaps most mysterious of all, the Philippe Buache Map of 1737, which shows Antarctica's subglacial terrain with uncanny accuracy, long before the technology existed to detect it. How did Buache know what was hidden under miles of ice? These aren't isolated cases. Ancient maritime charts from India, Egypt, and pre-Columbian South America depict landmasses that no longer exist. They hint at a world that was once broader, more connected, and now partially underwater. You've heard of Atlantis, the island empire swallowed by the sea, as described by Plato and echoed by Egyptian priests. But what about Lemuria? A massive land bridging the Indian and Pacific Oceans, referenced in Tamil texts, Tibetan scrolls, and Polynesian myth. Or Mu, a continent said to stretch across the Pacific, whose memory lingers in the temples of Easter Island and the pyramids of Mesoamerica. Many of these ancient charts point to submerged lands that align with tectonic scars, undersea plateaus, and satellite-mapped structures on the ocean floor. Coincidence? Or fragments of a story long submerged, now rising again? And it gets stranger. Some of these maps were drawn using latitude and longitude grids, a navigational system based on a spherical Earth, requiring precise knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and global positioning. So how could they possess knowledge centuries ahead of their time? Who were their sources? If we follow the breadcrumbs, the answer becomes clear. They were drawing from a pre-flood world, a time before the Great Deluge, when civilizations with seafaring capability traveled the globe, mapped it, and left behind records. Some carved in stone, others inked on parchment. But if these maps are real, if they hold fragments of truth long forgotten, then a more haunting question arises. Why aren't we taught about them? Why don't we see the Orontius Map in textbooks? Why is Buache a footnote? Why are the implications of these charts ignored by academia? In the next part, we'll look at the deliberate suppression of these maps, how they were hidden, dismissed, or erased, and why remembering them could unravel the version of history we were programmed to believe. Because these maps don't just show lost continents, they point to a lost narrative. Part 3. Suppressed Cartography. Why these maps were hidden. If ancient maps reveal continents that no longer exist, coastlines no one should have known, and civilizations older than time itself. Why aren't we taught about them? Simple. Because some truths don't just rewrite history, they rewrite power. Throughout history, whenever a map contradicted the dominant narrative, it was labeled blasphemy, myth, or simply ignored. In the medieval era, maps that showed anything beyond the known world were considered heretical. To question the sanctioned geography was to question the very order of the world, an order maintained by churches, empires, and academic gatekeepers. We've seen this before. When the Library of Alexandria burned, we didn't just lose scrolls, we lost entire worldviews, star charts, pre-Diluvian maps, Atlantean archives, gone. Some believe the fire wasn't an accident, but a strategic deletion of Earth's memory. Later, during the rise of European imperial powers, control over cartography became political. Maps weren't just tools of navigation, they became instruments of dominion. To control geography was to control consciousness. As the saying goes, those who define the map define the limits of perception. By limiting what lands were shown, what histories were acknowledged, and what names were remembered, elites could shape the mental terrain of an entire population. Anything that didn't fit the narrative. Maps of Antarctica before it froze, charts of Lemuria, trails to Atlantis, were locked away in archives, dismissed as fantasy, or quietly destroyed. Even today, some of these forbidden maps exist in university collections, private estates, or underground vaults. But access is restricted and their significance downplayed. And those who try to bring these maps into public discourse, branded as heretics, erased from the record, and forgotten by design. Why such resistance? Because if these maps are real, then history, as we know it, was manufactured. It would force science, history, religion, and politics to rewrite the foundations of human civilization. And for those in power, rewriting the story means losing control of the audience. But here's what they didn't count on. While the maps were suppressed, they were never fully erased. Copies were made. Clues were hidden. Symbols were embedded in architecture, artwork, and secret manuscripts. And some groups, those who understood the deeper purpose of these maps, preserved them in plain sight. Because maps aren't just geographic tools, they are spiritual blueprints. They encode the memory of ancient journeys, not just across oceans, but across consciousness itself. In the next part, we'll explore how secret societies and initiatory orders kept these sacred maps alive, not just as drawings, but as keys to energy, geometry, and the unseen structure of our world. Because while the world forgot, they remembered. Part 4. Secret Navigation and the Sacred Geometry of Maps. When the public was denied the truth, the secret societies drew their own maps, not the kind you'd find in a textbook or atlas, but maps embedded with codes, geometry, and celestial alignments. Maps not of where to go, but of who you must become to arrive. The Knights Templar, the Freemasons, and the Rosicrucians each held pieces of ancient navigation knowledge passed down through mystery schools and pre-flood civilizations. They charted not just routes, but energy lines, celestial paths, and sacred junctions where heaven met earth. Temples were built at the intersection of these lines. So were Gothic cathedrals, obelisks, and stone circles, from Stonehenge to Chartres, from Angkor Wat to the Great Pyramid. The locations weren't random. They were chosen with mathematical precision. Because the earth breathes through a sacred grid, an invisible lattice of energy, geometry, and memory. And ancient cartographers knew how to feel it, follow it, and anchor it. They understood something we've forgotten, that to navigate the Earth is to navigate consciousness. Many of their maps were encoded with sacred geometry. Golden ratios, vesica piscis, flower of life patterns. Not just for beauty, but because these forms resonated with the very structure of space and mind. Even the stars were part of the map. The alignment of monuments to constellations, the timing of journeys to planetary transits, the inscriptions hidden in zodiac wheels, all pointed to a deeper knowledge. That movement through the world mirrors movement through the self. In these traditions, to travel was to initiate. Each journey, each point on the map, corresponded to an inner transformation. The map wasn't a destination, it was a mirror. And those who could read it could unlock something far beyond location. They could access memory, purpose, and power. That's why these maps were hidden, not just to keep them safe, but because they could only be read by those who had the eyes to see. Some ink was meant to fade. Some symbols were designed to sleep, until you were ready to see. But today, something is shifting. More people are waking up to the patterns, to the codes embedded in ancient structures, to the symbols that repeat across cultures, not by accident, but by design. And as we remember how to read these maps, we begin to reawaken something that has been dormant for centuries, the ancient navigator within. In the next part, we'll explore how you, yes, you, can begin to see the world again with ancient eyes. Not just to travel across land, but to journey across dimensions of meaning, memory, and magic. Because the old maps were never just about where to go, they were about who you must become to arrive. Part 5. Learning to See. Reawakening the ancient navigator. They say the eyes can only see what the mind is ready to recognize, and for centuries, we were never taught how to see. Not the way the ancients did. We were taught to follow printed maps, external directions, rigid systems. But the navigators of old, those who charted sacred lands and buried cities, used a different compass. They navigated by intuition, by symbol, by energy. They understood that the map was not just around them. It was within them. To reawaken the ancient navigator, you must begin to look at the world differently. Start with symbols. What does a spiral mean? Not logically, but viscerally. What happens inside you when you see sacred geometry, ancient glyphs, or forgotten coordinates etched into stone? These are not decorations. They're instructions, coded layers of meaning waiting to be unlocked. Next, look at energy. Feel the land. Stand at a sacred site, an old temple, a stone circle, a forgotten ruin. And notice what your body tells you before your brain says anything. Ancient travelers aligned their journeys with the stars, their breath with the wind, their path with the pulse of the earth. They traveled not for distance, but for transformation. And you can do the same. Practice sacred observation. Go on pilgrimages not just to visit, but to listen. Study ancient maps, but not as historians, as mystics. Look for ratios, alignments, and mirrored patterns. Trace the golden mean, not with your eyes alone, but with your breath, your pulse, your rhythm. Meditate with maps. Yes, really. Let your breath follow their curves. Let your body become the terrain. Because what they chart is not just land, but levels of awareness. And then something strange happens. You stop needing maps. You begin to feel direction, not north or south, but inward and upward. You begin to sense your role in something ancient, as if you're walking paths that were once yours, long ago, because you're not just a seeker of old knowledge. You are a carrier of it, a node in a vast web of memory, a living scroll, a map that breathes. You are not reading the map. You are the terrain it was written for. The more you tune your inner vision, the more the forgotten world begins to reappear. In dreams, in symbols, in synchronicities, a past long buried, now rising through you. In the next episode, we'll go even deeper into the language of these ancient maps. Not in words, but in symbols, archetypes, sacred shapes, alchemical glyphs, and the hidden codes that connect us all. Because once you learn how to see the map, the next step is learning to read its language. Final CTA. If this video expanded your vision of the world, share it. Because every map is a memory, and every memory we awaken brings us one step closer to the truth of who we are. The map to the past might not just show us where we've been, but where we're going. And perhaps the ancient navigator inside you has already begun to remember. In the next episode, we'll explore a different kind of alchemy, where artificial intelligence meets ancient wisdom, and we ask the question, is AI the modern philosopher's stone? Because maybe the next frontier of transformation isn't in the stars or the soil, but in the code.